Part 3: The World Defined. The Global North defined. Figure 17: the US-led imperialist camp, 49 countries, 4 rings. The Global North is an integrated military, political, and economic bloc, at present composed of 49 countries, as pictured in Figure 17. These include the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Japan, and secondary Western and Eastern European countries. This US-led bloc is the imperialist camp in today's world. Figure 18: Global North rings. As pictured in Figure 18, the Global North is fundamentally a North Atlantic project, with 3 outlying countries: Australia, Japan, and New Zealand. Inspired by Samir Amin's concept of the triad, but expanding and modifying it to suit the realities of the present, the organization of the Global North Bloc can be best understood as layers of 4 concentric rings. The position of each country within each ring depends on its rapport with the United States and how close its intelligence services are to those of the US, which is explained below. GN Ring 1: 6 core US-led Anglo-American imperialist countries. Figure 19: Ring 1: US-led Anglo-American core. Ring 1, listed in Figure 19, represents the inner core of imperialism. The white English-speaking victors of World War II, the Five Eyes, US-UK in 1946, Canada in 1948, Australia and New Zealand in 1956, established themselves as the Praetorian Guard of what can be called the Anglo-American project. It is composed of the UK and the white settler states it spawned. Israel, treated by the US as the sixth eye, is unofficially part of the inner core. The cohesion of countries in this ring remains. An example is the Trilateral Security Alliance, AUKUS, created in September 2021. A fundamental key to understanding the global north is the special relationship between the United States and Israel. They are white settler states, founded on and justified by white supremacy and religious zealotry, and are the core of Ring 1 of the global north. The U.S. was established by white religious extremists who, in 1690, conceived and established their colonial settlements as plantations of religion. They believed that only they, the white Puritans, could realize God's plan in the quote unquote American wilderness. Their genocide against the Native Americans and enslavement of Africans were viewed as the inevitable and obvious outcome of their racial and religious superiority. Israel was the creation of British and US imperialism and was organized by the leaders of the Zionist movement. It was described by the military expert for The Guardian, Herbert Sidebotham, during World War I as follows, quote, "The only possible colonists of Palestine are the Jews, at once a protection against the alien East and a mediator between it and us, a civilization distinct from ours, yet imbued with our political ideas." Unquote. For the imperialists, freedom from discrimination was only the pretext for the formation of the Judaic and white supremacist state of Israel. As indicated earlier, between 1776, the year of independence from the British, and 2019, the US has spent 228 of 245 years in war/conflict and only 17 years in quote unquote peace. During its history, the United Kingdom's forces, or forces with a British mandate, have invaded, had some control over, or fought conflicts in 171 of the world's 193 countries that are currently UN member states, or 9 out of 10 of all countries. In its 70 years of existence, Israel has officially started 16 military conflicts with the Palestinians and the other Arab nations. One-fourth of them were under the rule of Benjamin Netanyahu. from 1996 to 1999, 2009 to 2023. Of course, not included in these official statistics are the multiple incursions by Zionist settlers and their army brethren against Palestinians. Israeli white racialism and religious demagogy have morphed from ideological justifications into material forces that have contributed to the qualitative change in imperialism today. This is exemplified by, among other things, the per capita military spend of the US, which is 12.6 times that of the world's average, with Israel's 7.2 times, the two of the largest in the global north. In the first month following 7 October 2023, Israel killed more civilians than all the civilian deaths in the Ukraine since 2022 and detonated more tons of explosives than the combined weight of the two nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The U.S. Congressional Research Service reported that, quote, Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign assistance since World War II. Israel is the first international operator of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the Department of Defense's fifth-generation stealth aircraft, considered to be the most technologically advanced fighter jet ever made. Unquote. Adjusting for inflation, U.S. aid to Israel from 1951 to 2022 totaled 317.9 billion US dollars. Nonetheless, it is the US, not Israel, who is driving the agenda in the region following 7 October 2023. Blinken's shuttle diplomacy sets the rules and tones for Israel's military operations and the quote unquote proportionate actions against the Palestinian resistance and regional powers. The US provides the necessary political and military support for Israel to eliminate the Palestinian resistance permanently, deter Iran and its allies, and push forward normalization with Arab neighboring countries. All these U.S. interventions seek to lay the ground for building the planned India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, which is not only an economic corridor but essentially an ideological and political plan to block China's increasing integration and influence in the region. Therefore, Israel constitutes a central junction for the U.S. programmed IMEC, which is outlined within the framework of the G7 Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, PGI, a Global North World Plan aiming essentially at countering China's BRI and any form of Global South long-lasting cooperation. GN Ring 2 9 core European imperialist powers. Figure 20 Ring 2 the European core. As listed in Figure 20, the countries in Ring 2 are the closest to the US-led inner core, namely Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Ring 2 is defined by each country's proximity and affinity and the trustworthiness of their intelligence functions to those of the United States. Politics is a concentrated expression of economics, Lenin explained. The military function is the essential expression of this political concentration. Post-World War II, and with the advent of the internet and social media, the control of communications and all its related functions has become a qualitatively new strategic intelligence asset of the state and has further advanced the US's dominant hegemonic control of vast portions of the world. Thanks to the work of WikiLeaks and the bravery of Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, the world was given its first public view into the secret world of intelligence relations among the imperialist forces. Instructively, the US prioritized its level of trust beyond the Five Eyes and the hidden special relationship with Israel. Subsequently, secretly but formally, the US created the Nine Eyes, which added Denmark, Norway, France, and the Netherlands. The Europeans were unwilling to have it be known, even privately, that Israel was a formal member. In addition, Israel did not fully trust many European powers with intelligence, so all parties allowed the US to continue having its special relationship with Israel. 50 years after World War II, the United States continued to exclude the former fascist powers of Germany, Italy, and Spain from the Five and Nine Eyes. Following the end of World War II, the US built an international system that was premised on the subordination and integration of the former fascist powers and the rest of Europe. This process of subordination and integration was evident in the military apparatus constructed by the United States, with NATO as one of the linchpins. Establishing a system of U.S. military bases in the defeated powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, allowed Washington to set aside any talk of a sovereign military or diplomatic project for the defeated. In 2001, five other countries, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Spain, and Sweden, were added to the Nine Eyes to become the 14 Eyes. Between 2005 and 2009, the US became increasingly alarmed about Russia and China. The unofficial pivot to Asia had begun. The official launch was delayed until Barack Obama took office in 2012. GN Ring 3, Japan and 14 lesser European imperialist powers. Figure 21, Ring 3, Japan and secondary European powers. Ring 3, listed in Figure 21, though made up of 15 countries, has a special focus on Japan, which has become a decisive frontline asset in the effort to curtail and suppress China and Russia. However, we have added here other secondary Western European powers, who, although loyal to the United States, are less strategic than others. A few of them, like Portugal, Finland, and Iceland, are part of NATO. Portugal is the only former fascist colonial power not in Ring 2 due to its small importance to U.S. military intelligence. They are not in the 14 Eyes, and its smaller GDP. Therefore, the third ring of the imperialist camp includes Japan and another 14 European countries: Switzerland, Ireland, Austria, Portugal, Greece, Finland, Luxembourg, Cyprus, Malta, Iceland, Andorra, San Marino, Liechtenstein, and Monaco. In the past several centuries, countries in the first three rings of the imperialist camps, other than Ireland, have caused massive human disasters. The United Kingdom, the US, and the Netherlands appropriated wealth through the African slave trade. Europeans implemented colonialism worldwide. The entirety of the Americas, nearly all of Africa, and more than half of Asia were dominated by colonizers. Anglo-Saxon white immigrants forcibly expelled or murdered indigenous people in the Americas, Australia, and New Zealand. There were several imperialist attempts to break up China, including the First Opium War, when Hong Kong was ceded in 1842, and then Taiwan at the end of the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895. In 1884-1885, European colonizers arbitrarily partitioned Africa at the Berlin Conference. This violent methodology of the partitioning has continued unabated until today, as evidenced by the 2011 partition of Sudan and by the ongoing destruction of the country and its people. In 1919, they dismantled the Austro-Hungarian and German empires through the Treaty of Versailles, transferred rights of some areas of China, Shandong, to Japan, handed German colonies in Africa to victorious European powers, and re-established a world order led by Anglo-American forces. As a result of internal crises and imperialist rivalries, fascist states arose within this camp, triggering World War II and leading to the death of at least 50 million Soviet and Chinese people. In the final stages of World War II, the US used atomic bombs on civilians. To this day, the US still refuses to renounce the first use of nuclear weapons and has unilaterally withdrawn from key nuclear and missile treaties. Since the end of World War II, Japan has become a strategic US ally. With the signing of the US-Japan Security Treaty in 1951, Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida accepted the dominance of the US military over his country. During the Cold War, Japan played a significant role in containing the Soviet Union and China on the Eastern Front, and this role continues today. Japan is the second country with the most U.S. military bases as of July 2023, 1998, only after Germany, 171. To date, none of the German bases are in the former German Democratic Republic. Although not officially a NATO member since 2014, Japan has cooperated with NATO on an individual basis, most recently agreeing to the Individually Tailored Partnership Program in July 2023, and has participated in the past two NATO summits. Japan also regularly participates in meetings held at NATO headquarters in Brussels between NATO allies and the four partners in the Indo-Pacific region at the level of ambassadors. This practical incorporation can be explained by the NATO 2022 strategic concept, which states that cooperation with partners in this region is key to addressing the increasingly complex global security environment, including Russia's war on Ukraine, the shift in the global balance of power and the rise of China, and the security situation on the Korean Peninsula. Unquote. In addition, Japan is the only G7 member not part of the NATO. In 2022, China was labeled by the Japanese government as, quote, the greatest strategic challenge ever to securing the peace and stability of Japan, and announced plans to double official military spending to 2% of the GDP, on par with NATO countries by 2027, overturning Japan's post-World War II cap, which had official limited military spending to 1% of GDP. GN Ring 4, 19 European Eastern Bloc integrated into NATO. Figure 22. Ring 4. Ring 4 is composed of the European members of the former Eastern Bloc and the Eastern European members of the former Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, COMCON, which lasted from 1949 to 91. They are a new category within the imperialist camp and thus not included by Samir Amin in his seminal work on the Triad. Ring 4, listed in Figure 22, of the imperialist camp includes Poland, Romania, Czech Republic, Ukraine, Hungary, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Serbia, Croatia, Lithuania, Slovenia, Latvia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Estonia, Albania, North Macedonia, Moldova, and Montenegro, except Belarus. 5 countries were formal republics of the Soviet Union. These countries were not previously part of the imperialist camp. To expand its hegemony, the US has targeted this region militarily, politically, and culturally. Serbia, part of the former Yugoslavia, was subjected to a 78-day NATO bombing in 1999. Despite not being a NATO member to this day, Serbia was compelled to participate in joint military exercises with NATO countries in June 2023. Romania's entrance to NATO did not involve a referendum. Instead, the ruling government modified the constitution, allowing senators to make the decision without consultation from the Romanian people. US and Western European expansion were done mainly through economic subordination and NATO's eastern expansion. 14 are NATO members, whilst 4, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, attended the NATO Vilnius meeting in June 2023. Some of these countries are governed by pro-NATO right-wing regimes. Examples include Poland, Ukraine, and Estonia, and actively playing the role of frontline troops against Russia. The Global South defined, Figure 23. The rest of the world, 145 diverse countries and territories, 6 groupings. Outside the 49 countries of the global North imperialist camp, making up the vast majority of the world's population, are 145 countries that constitute the global South. Figure 23. The use of the term Global South has primarily been a loose, imprecise reference. The actions over the last 4 years of the now fully aligned and integrated US led military bloc have, however, created a large group of countries that are the quote unquote rest of the world. The rest of the world are thus aligned initially by negative unity, i.e., all its members are excluded. Consequently, they have become a negation of the imperialist camp. These countries include Russia and Belarus, which are not developing countries but are heavily targeted for regime change and subjugation. The Global South includes mainly so called less developed or developing countries, geographically associated with countries in Latin America, Asia, Africa, and Oceania. It implicitly refers to countries that have been historically marginalized in the global economic system and are all grappling with the legacies of colonialism and imperialism. These countries were often called the Third World. The Global South lacks cohesion, an agreed on collective identity, and unified organization and action. Unlike the integrated Global North bloc, the Global South is not a unified group or bloc. These 145 countries each have distinct ideologies and political agendas with difference in proximity and orientation towards each other and Global North countries. Various disputes exist among some of them, ranging from territorial disputes, take the case of Eritrea and Ethiopia, to intra-regional political power struggles. Take the historical case of Saudi Arabia and Iran. Much of the global south pursues sovereignty, peace, and development, yet these countries rarely reach a global consensus on any issue. Often, this points to differences in the degree of proximity of any given country to the inner core of the global north. As such, we arrange these countries in groupings based on some common attributes rather than in an integrated, layered ring or distinct blocks. Figure 24, Global South groupings. The six groupings: socialist independent, strongly sovereign seeking, current or historic progressive, new non aligned, diverse global south, and heavily US militarized. However, this does not mean that the global south is, as some Western perspectives would have it, a fabricated concept devoid of substance. The global south, figure 24, is former colonies or semi colonies of the global north imperialist camp, having suffered centuries of oppression and humiliation under imperialism. A handful of these countries share, to varying degrees of commitment or realization, a socialist political orientation. Objectively, China's current 2022 per capita income, that's 12,850 US dollars, makes it a developing country. It is also because of this common historical background that Xi Jinping, in his BRICS Business Forum 2023 speech, read by Wang Wentao, stated, as a developing country and a member of the Global South, China breathes the same breath with other developing countries and pursues a shared future with them. Unquote. The genealogical roots of the Global South can be traced to the Third World Project that attempted to shift the international balance of forces in favor of the of the newly politically independent but economically indentured countries in the mid 20th century. This included efforts of the Bandung Conference, 1955, Non-Alignment Movement, 1961, Organization of Solidarity with the People of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, 1966, and the pursuit of a new international economic order, 1974, through the formation of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, 1964, by developing countries. These countries hold historical and contemporary marginalization in the global economic and political order in common. One of the most poignant but devastating examples of this Commonality is the environmental and ecological damage that the global north has visited upon global south countries. Resource extraction and financial speculation on land and crops has led to deforestation, habitat destruction, soil degradation, and water pollution. This has created significant loss of biodiversity and large swaths of uncultivatable agricultural land, destroying local ecosystems and species and resulting in widespread hunger. In addition, global north multinational corporations are responsible for air, water, and soil pollution through nefarious methods. Neoliberalism ensures that there are no regulations to prevent these practices. Prohibited in the global north but widespread in the global south, agrochemicals and the generation of hazardous and other waste materials have increased health risks, especially to indigenous people, women, children, and elders. Manufacturing, mining, energy, and transportation companies continuously emit greenhouse gases, the greatest contributor to climate change, putting the global south in imminent danger of catastrophe. Direct foreign investment by global north multinational corporations have decimated the environment, destroyed agricultural lands, and increased the precarity of all working peoples. At the same time, the global north uses the climate crisis to push more land grabbing and privatization of biodiverse resources through the financialization of nature. All these 145 countries are now enduring the immense pressure of imperialist overexpansion. Some of the common challenges these countries continue to face include, but are not limited to, historical underdevelopment, primary sector dependence, limited industrialization, external debt, trade imbalances, technological gaps, infrastructural deficit, and disproportionate environmental crisis. Disillusioned by the challenges mentioned above, growing sections of the new bourgeoisie in global south countries who emerged through rapid economic growth over the past 2 decades, particularly in Asia, are gradually losing confidence in the political, economic, and moral leadership of both the United States and Europe. New centers of economic power, such as China, offer alternative development and investment models, e.g., through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, and have become more attractive to the global South bourgeoisie. Among the 145 countries of the Global South, six groupings of countries can be identified. While each grouping has some identifiable shared traits, importantly, the grouping number correlates to the descending order of countries considered to be a threat to the US led Anglo American imperialist bloc. Membership in the groupings is dynamic and can change according to the political and economic conjuncture. GS Grouping 1. Six independent socialist countries. Figure 25, Grouping 1. Socialist independent. China, Vietnam, Venezuela, Laos, DPR Korea, Cuba. All six countries in Grouping 1, Figure 25, are advancing socialism to varying degrees and often take progressive international positions. Five of the six are in the group of friends in defense of the UN Charter. China is the critical member in this grouping. Its GDP, measured by purchasing power parity, ranks first globally, almost tripling India's. China's GDP, PPP, corresponds to the 190% of the United States. It has made the most significant advancement in human development by lifting 850 million people out of extreme poverty in the last 4 decades. Though it does not seek hegemony over the world system, it is viewed by the US and its allies as the prime threat to their hegemony, labeled in recent years as a near peer competitor in US State and Defense Department strategy documents. China not only represents an economic threat, but with the resurgence of a stronger Communist Party under President Xi Jinping, represents a major political threat with its overt revitalization of socialist and communist traditions. China is thrust by its national and social interests and its historical support for the global south into the role of supporting counter hegemonic processes and projects. China continues to publicly state a commitment to narrowing the north south gap. While China represents the major economic and political challenge to global North hegemony today, Cuba and Venezuela represent the front line of historical socialist resistance. Cuba continues to push back against the suffering caused by the over 6 decades of the US led economic embargo and blockade. Cuba and heavily sanctioned Venezuela have made no attempt to hide their pursuit of a socialist agenda. DPR Korea remains the West boogeyman in the East, while Laos and Vietnam have long standing communist parties at the helm of their governments and are undergoing rapid economic development. Ever since the founding of the Soviet Union, the world's left forces have faced a contradiction between the needs of the state and people of the socialist projects and the needs of the working class in specific countries or regions. Strategic thinking by the working class leaders in all countries is required to keep contradictions among the people non antagonistic and ensure that the decisive blow is directed at the center of imperialism. Pursuing the dictum that communists have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole requires an investigation of the concrete. For example, defeats such as the fall of the Soviet Union are catastrophic for all workers. Numerous tactical decisions must be made to take advantage of the cracks in the imperialist camp to protect socialist projects and movements, whether in power or not. GS Grouping 2: 10 strongly sovereign seeking countries. Figure 26, Grouping 2. This includes Russia, Iran, Belarus, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Niger, Syria, Afghanistan, Eritrea. Countries in this grouping, Figure 26, are not socialist states but are prime targets of US led regime change. These countries are fiercely defending their sovereignty and that of others, as seen by 7 out of 9 voting against the US backed resolution for Russian withdrawal in February 2023 and their full support of a ceasefire in Gaza. Although these nations have different reasons for doing so, they face some of the most acute situations of the struggle for national sovereignty. They are on the front line of the global South struggle against imperialism. Whilst they are all either fully or partially economically dependent on the West, they are actively pursuing political independence. They are, therefore, subjected to extreme hybrid warfare from imperialism. Put simply, most of these countries are included in US intelligence's critical targets for regime change, particularly since the US backed right wing coup in Ukraine in February 2014, followed by Crimea's annexation for unification. Russia has been a primary target for regime change by the imperialist camp. The US and its allies have dedicated considerable resources towards weakening, dismantling, and denuclearizing Russia. The US has provided more than 90 billion US dollars in military assistance to Ukraine for the campaign against Russia from from February 2014 to February 2022. Belarus is geopolitically and economically allied with Russia, such as through the Collective Security Treaty Organization formed in 1992, as well as the Union State of Belarus and Russia formed in 1996, and therefore remains within the crosshairs of US intelligence. Since the 1978 and 1979 revolutions that ousted US allied leaders, Afghanistan and Iran have been targets of US military intervention and political interference. Iran has been an obstacle to Western advances in the region with its nuclear energy program, strong regional influence in proxy conflicts, and consistent anti Western and anti Israel posture. Afghanistan was invaded by the US in 2001, with the US spending 2 decades and over 2 trillion US dollars, that's $300 million a day, to gain a foothold in Central Asia, eventually withdrawing in 2021. Since 2011, Syria has been a battleground for U.S. attempts to secure control over the whole of West Africa, a war that proves journalist Patrick Steele's 1965 definition of Syria, the mirror of rival interests. This group is growing, with countries such as Eritrea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger taking bolder steps to protect their national sovereignty. Eritrea has had a long term hostility towards the US and being a target of US intervention via Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have rejected the neo colonial presence of France in the Sahel and removed their Western aligned political leaders. They have established both the Sahel Economic Alliance and the Alliance of Sahel States, aiming for economic and military cooperation. However, their political situation is still unstable, and they are struggling to guarantee their actual independence from imperialist powers. GS Grouping 3: 11 countries, current or historic progressive. Figure 27, Grouping 3. The countries: Brazil, Colombia, South Africa, Algeria, Nepal, Bolivia, Honduras, Nicaragua, Zimbabwe, Palestine, Namibia. The countries listed in Figure 27 are allocated to this grouping based on two essential concerns: the relative degree to which they are targets of regime change and their role in publicly advancing international anti imperialist stances. Those in this grouping are either the next in line for regime change, following Grouping 2, or are playing a clear role in speaking out against the interests of the imperialist camp. Regarding countries that pursue progressive agendas, examples include Brazil under the Workers' Party, PT, and South Africa under the Tripartite Alliance, which includes the African National Congress, the South African Communist Party, and the Congress of South African Trade Unions, with the former showing leadership in building alternative intergovernmental institutions such as the South American Nations Union, UNASUR, in 2008, Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, in 2011, and the IBSA Dialogue Forum, which was supplemented by BRICS by 2009, with the latter playing an important role in building the African Union. These countries sometimes defend progressive international positions, such as standing with Cuba against U.S. sanctions in international organizations. Nepal abolished the monarchy in 2008, established a republic led by the left, and has made significant strides in legally and politically emancipating historically marginalized communities. Palestine has been under occupation and siege for over 7 decades. Algeria has staunchly supported Palestinian self-determination and independence and, within the African Union, has been influential in promoting progressive stances on African unity and economic development. Following the popular coup in Niger, Algeria was the only African state to promptly advocate for non-military solutions to political crises. These countries attempt to find a path of sovereign development within a global capitalist system, yet confront severe internal contradictions. For example, South Africa was forced into significant economic concessions in the 1990s, including the deindustrialization and privatization, leading to catastrophic results. Today, 57% of South Africans live below the poverty line, 46% are unemployed, and the share of manufacturing to the GDP has decreased from 25% in 1981 during apartheid rule to 12% in 2022. Unlike China, for example, these nations have seen their revolutionary potential curtailed, or their revolutions did not culminate in socialism, but have tried to pursue progressive agendas in domestic, regional, and/or international spheres. These countries are considered by the US to have political positions that are inimical to the hegemony of the global North. Many of these countries have experienced US interventions, hybrid warfare, sanctions, and government overthrows. Recent instances of these interventions include the coup in Honduras 2009, Brazil 2016, and Bolivia 2019. Zimbabwe continues to face U.S. sanctions. GS Grouping 4. 5 new non-aligned countries. Figure 28, Grouping 4. The countries listed: India, Indonesia, Turkey, Mexico, and Saudi Arabia. With sizable economies of scale, the non-alignment that characterizes countries in this grouping is economic, not political. Figure 28. These non-socialist countries are not reviving the political project of the non-aligned movement. Most of these countries have had 50 years or more of independence from former colonial rulers and today have very different relationships to them. Economically, all 5 non-aligned countries have significant GDPs, all ranking in the top 20 largest economies in GDP PPP terms in 2022, and are taking increasingly independent economic measures. These countries have recognized that the US hoarding of foreign exchange reserves and sanctions against countries with 30% of the world's population poses severe threats. Today, more than 1 in 4 countries are subject to UN or Western government sanctions, while 29% of the global GDP is produced in sanctioned countries, up from 4% in the 1960s. Politically, they are ambivalent. Militarily, Indonesia, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia maintain very close relations with the United States. Saudi Arabia is one of the largest purchasers of advanced US weapons. Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan is a less reliable partner for the West, notwithstanding Turkey being a NATO member. This grouping shows highly contradictory behaviors on the international stage. They show some degree of slowly decreasing economic dependence on and alignment with the West and/or are prepared to oppose it on some key issues. Despite India's alignment with the US organizations such as the Quad or its reactionary positions on Israel and its war on Gaza since the start of the war in Ukraine, India has refused to accede to some important US demands, such as refusing to implement US sanctions against Russia. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar vocally defended his government's refusal to accede to Washington's pressure, saying at a press conference in June 2023, "A lot of Americans still have that NATO treaty construct in their heads. It seems almost like that is the only template or viewpoint with which they look at the world. That is not a template that applies to China." Unquote. The conflict with Canada and now with the US over alleged Indian intelligence operations in their countries is complicating the plan of the US to gain the support of India against China. The big national bourgeoisie of India is beginning to assert their interests. Saudi Arabia differs from the US when its economic self-interests dictate, e.g., increasing Saudi-China investments, including oil deals paid in Chinese yuan, and using its partnership with Russia at OPEC Plus to define the global price of oil. However, simultaneously, at the run-up to the Arab League summit in November 2023, Saudi Arabia blocked Algerian efforts to close US bases, blocked Iranian proposed military aid to Palestine, stopped a proposed trade boycott, and refused to curtail oil shipments to Israel. The Pentagon, CIA, and Saudi Arabia were frontline allies in the recent war against Yemen that took tens of thousands of lives. The US Special Forces provided Saudi pilots with the bombing coordinates of their targets. Indonesia, home to the largest Islamic population in the world, has had a compounded average growth rate of the GDP PPP of 4.2% between 2012 and 2022. According to IMF forecasts, by 2030, Indonesia could be the fifth largest economy in the world by GDP PPP. Its state-owned enterprises assets as a share of GDP increased from 43% in 2014 to 54% in 2018. In 2020, Indonesia banned the export of raw nickel, a key component of lithium batteries. Indonesia accounted for 39% of global nickel production in 2022. Its total exports in current terms surged from 183 to 323 billion US dollars between 2020 and 2022. On 2 February 2023, during the Mandri Investment Forum in Jakarta, President Joko Widodo warned, "We must remember the sanctions imposed by the US on Russia. Visa and MasterCard could be a problem." Unquote. He also stated that if we use our own platforms and everybody is using them, from ministries and local administrations to municipal governments, then we can be more secure. Unquote. Yet in November 2023, the US, an active participant in the torture and assassination of 500,000 plus Indonesian communists, and Indonesia signed an agreement upgrading their relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership. Indonesia withdrew its application to join BRICS in 2023 and has expressed public interest in becoming an OECD member. Confronted with a war of aggression under international law, 1846 was the de facto moment that consolidated the emerging U.S. imperial project in Mexico. Forced to exchange land for peace and cede 50% of its territory, the new Mexico US border became a historical line that internally constitutes an inexorable and preordained determination. On the other hand, Mexico has a history that relentlessly returns to its anti colonial roots, indigenous culture, and anti imperialist modern history. Very little analysis is given to the complex interdependency of Mexico and the US, e.g., in population, culture, economics, but perhaps more significant in terms of geopolitical security for the viability of US hegemony. The government of López Obrador is at multiple levels an attempt of the Mexican social movement to launch a low intensity counter neoliberal reform. The concentration is on recovering the public property of all strategic resources, launching a new agrarian reform, and reclaiming land as social property. The current agrarian reform in Mexico guarantees by law the registration of 50.6% of the territory as social communal property in the hands of campesinos and indigenous communities. 29,803 agrarian communes on 99.7 million hectares. However, the 2020 United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, formerly the North American Free Trade Agreement, represents a constant impediment to the uncoupling or disentanglement of Mexico's political position vis-à-vis the emerging global South. In June 2023, the U.S. began preliminary proceedings through the USMCA arbitration to block the presidential decree that would take various measures to ban genetically modified corn, which makes up 96% of U.S. corn exports. The U.S. is exhibiting more aggressive and interventionist policies to undermine the long and hard fought historical gains of Mexican sovereignty. In 2022, Mexican President López Obrador refused to attend the 8th Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles after news emerged that the United States would not invite Cuban, Venezuelan, and Nicaraguan leaders to the meeting. The five countries in this grouping have differing political, economic, or military perspectives and different nuanced levels of closeness to the global north. However, their growing new national bourgeoisies are gradually seeking alternative economic relations and occasional political divergences with the US, albeit out of self-interest and self-preservation. The question of the new national bourgeoisie emerging in the global south is outside the scope of this text. It will be addressed in our 2024 research on capital formation and ownership in the global south. GS Grouping 5, 111 diverse global south countries. Figure 29, Grouping 5. The countries: Egypt, Pakistan, Thailand, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Argentina, Malaysia, United Arab Emirates, Singapore, Kazakhstan, Chile, Peru, Iraq, Morocco, Ethiopia, Uzbekistan, Sri Lanka, Kenya, Qatar, Myanmar. There are 111 countries that are not included in the previous Global South 4 groupings above due to multiple diversities. Figure 29 lists the 20 largest economies. The full list is in the appendix. They do not share the same political views nor governmental systems. Eswatini, Qatar, and Bhutan are still governed by monarchies, whilst Libya, Syria, and Somalia do not have a single governing authority. A handful of countries have abandoned socialist agendas after being hamstrung by Western development finance, such as in the case of Angola and Mozambique. Due to imperialist political and economic intervention, a series of countries in this grouping suffer severe governmental dysfunctionality, breakdown of governance, authority, and law, and are almost entirely unable to provide for their people. The economic performance of these countries varies significantly. For example, despite Nigeria being the second largest economy in Africa and having a GDP PPP 14 times that of Cambodia, the former has seen a 0.4% negative annual average growth rate between 2012 and 2022, while the latter grew by an annual 5.3%. Among these countries, they have different levels of military allegiance to the global north. Egypt has been a strategic partner of Israel and the United States since 1979, while Bangladesh, Comoros, and Djibouti participated in submitting a referral to the International Criminal Court regarding the situation in the State of Palestine on 17 November 2023. They have a range of internal conflicts and territorial disputes, such as in the case of Morocco's colonial occupation of Western Sahara beginning in 1975. Others, for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Haiti, are subjected to UN military interventions where other Global South countries take part. Countries in Grouping 5 participate in diverse multilateral platforms with both Global South and Global North nations. Membership in these groupings can change should a country develop more distinctive characteristics. For example, whilst Argentina has played historically progressive roles in the region, the recent right wing drift currently precludes membership in that grouping today. Therefore, this is not a static or permanent position. GS Grouping 6. Two de facto U.S. military colonies, Figure 30, Republic of Korea and the Philippines. The peoples of these two nations, Figure 30, largely aligned with the Global South. Both countries have had pro-US leaders as well as independent-leaning leaders. However, these countries are militarily entirely controlled by the US. Historically, both nations have been subordinated to the US through military conquest. After World War II, when the US had militarily occupied the Korean Peninsula, and later at the end of the Korean War, the Republic of Korea retained a large US military presence. Its economic reconstruction was almost entirely funded and directed by the US. Following the Spanish American War, the Philippines was a U.S. colony for nearly 5 decades, from 1898 to 1946. This vassalage is evident today. After the elections of Yoon Suk-yeol in the Republic of Korea and Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in the Philippines in 2022, both have served as frontline positions in containing China. In February 2023, the Philippines invited the U.S. to expand its military presence in the country by adding four more bases to the existing five U.S. operated bases. 30 years after Philippine lawmakers ruled to end permanently the U.S. military presence in the country. The Republic of Korea has also increased the military expansion of the US, participating alongside Japan, quote, to inaugurate a new era of trilateral partnership, unquote, with the US. In addition, the General Security of Military Information Agreement between Japan and the Republic of Korea, facilitated by their closer alignment with the US, expands intelligence sharing between the two countries to include threats from China and Russia. Their military expenditures should be attributed to the US led military bloc. Figure 31 Global South countries with per capita military spending exceeding world average, excluding Russia. Figure 31 lists all Global South countries with military spending exceeding the world average, except Russia, which was shown earlier. Many of these countries have close military relations with the United States but are not listed in Grouping 6. The countries Saudi Arabia, Republic of Korea, Qatar, Singapore, Kuwait, Oman, Lebanon, Bahrain, Uruguay, Brunei.